few days ago, I was home, not quite alone. My 6-year-old son was asleep. My partner and his grandmother had gone to the hospital due to her having a concussion. His sister was at work, so it was just my sleeping son, 2 little dogs, and myself. There is a red rosebush next to the front porch I've been nursing back to health, because it was planted by my partner's late mother. It's something I want to do for my partner and his sister, and to honor her memory. It's looking great. I left a rose cut from it on the front porch railing a few nights before. It stayed there through fairly heavy winds. While they were gone, I poured my coffee in a mug with a big, pretty, bold rose painted on it. Then I looked out the front door and noticed the rose was no longer on the railing, but was on the porch floor, right in front of the front door and at the top of the steps. I didn't think much of it, and didn't open the door. My son was still fast asleep. I went to the back porch to smoke a cigarette and drink my coffee, letting the dogs out with me. I noticed one had gotten away from my sight, probably to the road around the front. So I opened the back door to go inside to the front porch, but, planning to come right back, just left it open, and the other dog right there, to either stay out or follow me in. The door opens inward, into a bedroom. I quickly walked through 2 rooms and opened the front door to see if the missing dog was at the road. He was. I called him, and he started running around the back of the house. But I instantly noticed the rose was gone. It wasn't there anymore. I hesitated a few seconds, looked around, noticed nothing else was off, went back inside and shut the front door behind me. This all took less than a minute, if that. My son was still asleep. I hurried back through the 2 rooms to get to the open back porch where one dog was, and hopefully the other dog had gone back too. I froze when I saw the back door was closed completely, and the dog I had left on the back porch had been shut out, looking at me. That door is not easy to shut. It basically has to be slammed or just carefully and firmly pushed shut with 2 hands. I just stood there for a moment, freaked out, staring at the dog looking at me. My heart skipping beats, Then walked toward the door, opened it, went out on the back porch and looked around, seeing nothing but the dogs. It really unnerved me because there is no way the dog could have shut the door. It isn't possible. I made sure there was no one else in the house. I never heard anyone. There were no signs of anyone having been in the house or outside creeping around. But that doesn't mean they weren't, My son never woke up. I did tests to see if me opening and closing the front door would at all affect the back door, but no, it didn't. It couldn't have been wind because the door opens inward, and that door is hard to close. The AC wasn't on. What made it a little creepier to me, to be honest, was that before I went out on the back porch to smoke and let the dogs out that morning, I poured my morning coffee in a cup with a big bold red rose printed on it, and taken it on the back porch with me. So I don't know. Once, a while back, I was relaxing on the front porch. My phone was just a couple of inches from my feet, the screen locked. It requires a PIN. No programs were running at that time, no alarms set, and I cannot set my alarms to play songs from my music program. I was actually kind of meditating, not deep meditation or anything, just relaxed breathing, basically with my eyes closed, totally lucid. Listening to things around me, that sort of thing. The breeze, chimes in the distance, insects. Everyone else was deep inside and asleep. I could literally look inside the window behind me and see my partner asleep on the couch. It was like 3 a.m. Suddenly I heard music from my phone. It was unlocked, and my music program was open, and it started playing a song. This song was about a woman not being able to tell if she was experiencing reality or a dream, her imagination playing tricks on her. Her sense of time being confused. I'm showing up in the future like I've been here before. How she could hear bells and wind and a song in her heart, like a ghost in the streets. A very intense song and quite personal to me at the time. I was sober. I never found evidence of malware on my phone, but obviously I can't be sure someone wasn't messing with me. Anyway, both experiences were pretty unsettling to me. Maybe my phone glitched. Maybe a person was creeping around last week. But my partner's mom had a very strong personality and spirit and died too young. She was wronged by her mother, the grandmother, right up to the day she died, and even to this day. I got a thorn stuck in my finger tending the rosebush, and when it finally came out, I was oddly a little sad. I felt strangely instinctively protective over her daughter, my partner's sister, despite us having conflict. I know that we were quite different, but in some ways quite similar, and suffered many uniquely similar hardships and were horribly mistreated and abused in many similar ways, particularly by our mothers. My son, who has a very similar personality to hers, was born just 2 weeks after she died. Just many coincidences that have slowly come unveiled over the years. I really just wanted to share this, whatever any of it means, and thanks for listening. 2. My family and I lived in a church for almost 30 years. To explain a bit about this, my parents met at church, and when they got married, they were asked if they wanted to be the custodians of the church and live in the pastor's quarters above the church, since they didn't have any other place to live, being young and poor. They accepted. The layout of the building was more or less like this. You would come home through the front door of the church, from the street, walk through the middle of the church and go to the back where there was a door and a set of stairs going into the pastor's quarters. It was a tiny one-bedroom apartment where the 5 of us shared that one bedroom. My parents had 3 kids, including me, and we had 2 dogs by the time I was a teenager. The apartment also had a terrace and a laundry room next to it. There was always weird activity going on in the building for as long as I can remember. All 5 of us experienced either separately or collectively paranormal activity, such as hearing steps walking towards us, voices and noises, a dark presence that made us feel tense and cold, etc. One night my dad was away. He would travel sometimes for work, and we were having dinner with my mom and brothers. Suddenly we hear slow steps coming up the stairs that led to the church downstairs. The steps sounded like high heels from a woman. Very slowly, it walked up the stairs, walked into our kitchen, dining, and living room area, passing behind us and leading into our bedroom. We all froze and looked at each other, and my mother asked us if we heard that. We nodded. My oldest brother, to keep us calm and him being the most rational out of all of us, grabbed a knife and decided to look through the apartment and through the church. Of course, he didn't find anything, and it helped lighten the mood since my brother and I were younger. Another time I came home from buying groceries with my mother and found my middle brother crying in the corner, terrified, and he said he was playing on the computer when he heard steps coming towards him. Another time I heard voices in the middle of the night coming from the church. I was in bed, and I couldn't move. I felt like a presence was staring at me from the laundry room. This makes sense, since there was 2 windows that sort of connected from the terrace to our bedroom. I later asked my brother if he had been downstairs in the church talking with someone, and he said he had been away all night. The days of most activity were Thursdays, since those were praying days at the church. They would also do funerals there. And a lady once happened to die during service and was brought back to life through CPR. What I mean is lots of spiritual activity in that place. My middle brother would always have the weirdest dreams, and we would all experience sleep paralysis quite regularly. One night I was at a friend's birthday party at a bar, and my mom calls me, completely terrified, asking me if I could come home because she was all done, and she heard how someone ran up the stairs to our apartment, and it turned on a temporary light that had a timer, which would light up the church for about 30 seconds, so you could walk through it without having to turn on all the lights. She was hysterical. My mom would always anoint the apartment and the stairs, trying to keep whatever those things were at bay. My mom always experienced the worst things. She always had, like, that 6th sense. She'd felt things touching her or whispering on her ear at night. When we finally moved after 28 years of living there, I was 20 at the time, we never experienced that level of activity again. The new pastors decided to move in and take the apartment. They only lasted a month there. They asked my mother if we had ever felt a presence in there or that somebody touched us, even though you couldn't see anyone, and my mom's response to him was, "Oh, you already left them, huh? We lived with them for years." Even though I still feel sensitive to paranormal things, I've never again experienced the panic I feel in that place. Definitely a portal to another dimension. There's many more experiences I've written in here, like seeing a black dog running past me when walking through the church, or my dogs barking at random walls or corners. I've never posted it online before, but figured you guys would appreciate some real stories. I swear these are all true. Just felt I wanted to add this. One time I was alone at night, and I was 20, right before we moved. I made the horrible mistake of smoking pot at the terrace. Never had done it before, since we were raised hardcore Christians, and smoking pot in the church premises was like blasphemy, really. Then I went into the bedroom. Don't know why I thought that was a good idea. All my senses heightened and felt like I could hear whispers all over, steps, and like the whole place was closing in on me. I became hyper-aware of the presence there. I had to call my friend and asked her if I could sleep at her place. Could have been that I was already conditioned by the pot, but still, worst feeling ever. You have to understand that most of the time, it wasn't even that things were happening, but the feeling that someone was constantly watching you, and that feeling would freeze us. I wouldn't be able to move an inch every time I felt it. When we moved, the second or third night, I had this dream where I was again in that bedroom, and a dark entity lifted me up from the floor and started to choke me, and my dog would be barking next to me, to the entity, and suddenly my dog was also being lifted up from the ground, with his legs pointing forward. I woke up speaking prayers and went to wake up my mom, scared. She told me my dad had woken up the same way, screaming, rebuking, and praying just 15 minutes earlier. I remember thinking it was like the last attempt of the entities to get to us. After that, it all stopped. 3. Almost 40 years ago, I was a pupil at a boarding school, a private school for non-British readers, in a rural part of the UK. The boarders lived in a vast, rambling Victorian Gothic manor house near the main school. The story was that the family who originally built it had gone bankrupt a few years after it was constructed, and it was sold to a lady who used a wheelchair. This being in the days before widespread electricity, particularly in such a rural location, she traveled between floors by means of a dumb waiter operated by a servant, who pulled or released the rope to allow her to go up or down, with the dumb waiter being accessed through a doorway on each floor. One day a careless servant apparently let go of the rope, for some reason, and the dumb waiter, with the lady in it, fell from the top floor all the way to the cellars, which extended far below the house, and was tragically killed. Bear in mind that I was told this story after I arrived at the school and before the main event of my tale occurred. I was also told that she haunted the house, although I was highly skeptical about that part. Opposite the dormitory, which I shared with several other boys, was a bricked-up doorway, i.e. a door frame, but nothing else. I was told that this was the entrance to the dumb waiter, and verified that identical bricked-up doorways existed on floors above and below it, including in the cellars. I snuck down there late one night despite us being forbidden to enter it. Now to the main part of my story. About 11 o'clock one night, my roommates and I were in bed. Most were asleep, but I was not. The lights had been turned out by the staff a couple of hours before, and we were forbidden to talk after this took place. All was dark and silent. As I lay there struggling to sleep, a very loud scream suddenly came from outside the door. I will swear until my dying day that it was an adult woman. A woman's scream sounds different from that of a girl or a man, and a scream of pure terror. It lasted a couple of seconds and then faded away. My roommates were awakened by it, and I could hear the doors to the other dormitories further down the hall and on the floor above opening as people flooded out of their rooms to find out what was going on. Within a couple of minutes, the housemaster and several other teachers had also arrived on the scene and accused us of making the noise, issuing threats of severe punishment once the perpetrator was identified. That never happened, of course. I have never been able to explain it, but the scream came, as far as I could tell, from the old entrance to the dumb waiter, which had been bricked up for over 100 years if the stories were true. It was also definitely from an adult woman, and there were none in the boarding house at that time of night. I know I didn't imagine it, as about 50 people heard it. Was it an echo of that poor lady's last trip down the dumbwaiter so many years ago? After nearly 4 decades, I have been unable to come up with any other explanation. 4. When I was younger, my grandfather and his sister used to tell me the same chilling story over and over again. A story about a wardrobe that haunted our family for generations. This wasn't just any wardrobe, it was the kind of thing you could move around, not built into the wall, and it seemed normal enough at first glance. But the spirit tied to it, that was anything but normal. According to my aunt, the spirit of a soldier haunted this wardrobe. The soldier had supposedly died during a war, connected somehow to a stash of diamonds he either stole or found. Many people were searching for these diamonds, and the soldier paid the ultimate price when someone killed him. What they didn't know was that he had hidden the diamonds inside the wardrobe. The story goes that the soldier's ghost stayed with the wardrobe wherever it went, always wearing his army uniform. My mom remembers the wardrobe vividly. When she was little, it sat in the backyard of her aunt's house, and she and her siblings would play near it. But she always had the feeling of being watched. She never dared go too close. My aunt claimed the spirit had spoken to her once. It promised to reveal the location of the diamonds, but only on one condition. It wanted a life in exchange for the treasure. My aunt believed the soldier's death over the diamonds had bound him to the wardrobe, and he wouldn't give them up without claiming another life. Terrifying things would happen when anyone tried to open or search the wardrobe. It would tip over, seemingly on its own, nearly crushing them. Sometimes nails would shoot out from the wood as if the wardrobe was defending itself. The family eventually stopped trying. They left the wardrobe in the backyard, not wanting to destroy it, since it had been passed down through generations, but also too scared to keep it in the house. Years later, my aunt had to move to Australia and couldn't take the wardrobe with her. She asked my grandfather to take it. He hated the wardrobe and wanted nothing to do with it, but reluctantly he agreed. Instead of carefully loading it into his truck, my grandfather threw it in the back with no straps or ropes secured to it. Then he drove recklessly, hoping the wardrobe would fall off along the way. And it did. Somewhere down the road, the wardrobe tumbled off the truck, shattering into pieces. My grandfather didn't even stop to look back. He left it there, broken, on the side of the road. What's strange is that we never heard from the spirit again. It didn't come for revenge, and it didn't seem to follow him. We think that perhaps it stayed with the remnants of the wardrobe. Whether someone picked up the wood or the remains are still rotting on the side of the road, I don't know. But part of me wonders, what if the diamonds are still out there too? And what kind of curse might follow anyone who finds them? 5. So this story is from my teens. Nearly 10 years ago. I would have been 14 or close to it at the time. I must have been on school break, but I remember hanging out at my friend's place, Chris, with another friend of ours named Sexton. Chris was considered wealthy, rich to me as a little 14-year-old. He had a big quad bike he would always take out exploring the bushland with. So we ended up deciding to go swimming one afternoon. There was an old quarry that had filled up and was a popular swimming spot for local teens growing up. He lived not far out of town, but was considered rural living. Everyone lived on a small acreage around the area, semi-country living. The trek to get there was too far to walk. Easily accessible on the quad, though. It was early afternoon when we decided to go. This quad was only meant to fit 2, but easily managed 3 young teenage boys. I remember sitting on the back side while Sexton sat on the other and Chris rode. The fastest way there was through a pine forest, and then down some back roads into dirt roads and so on. The story isn't about the quarry itself, or the back roads, but the forest. This sinister, dark, almost Blair Witch-type forest. To give you a bit of backstory on this place, this pine forest was notorious for scary stories growing up. I remember my older brother telling me how him and his friend were on dirt bikes, and had seen dead animals hanging from trees. Pigs and dogs or something similar to a dog, he said. Another, Chris's older brother, told me one night he was taking his girlfriend through there on his dirt buggy. He came across, and swore by this, a group of hooded people in a circle, cult ritual stuff. He immediately did a 180 and drove as fast as he could out of there. All tales to stew the mind at night to me at this point. That was until I experienced my own set of unexplained events. This particular day, we decided to go to the quarry for a swim. This is the day I experienced something supernatural. I remember vividly as we left his front gates open onto the seemingly quiet country roads. Everything was good. We were young adolescent teens heading into the local swim spot on school break. Approaching the forest, I grew more immature and started to show off to Chris and Sexton, yelling out to the forest, "Come get us," and "Where are you? We aren't scared," as we rapidly approached. As you enter the forest, no matter the time of day, the shade from the ever-growing trees darken the surroundings around. Having been a popular hiking and trail track, there are many different paths you can easily get lost on, even for a local. As we went through the forest on the quad bike, I continued my cheeky remarks and mockery while my friends were bursting in laughter and thrill. There wasn't anything unusual yet. We often were jokers and were the usual sporty class clown kids, so this was common behavior to us at the time. We went swimming for what must have been many hours, jumping off the cliff and climbing back in. It got too late, dark almost. We decided it was time to head home. The journey would take roughly 35 minutes each way on the quad. For whatever reason, Chris told me to ride the quad back, and he wanted to chill on the back. Me being a motorhead loved it. I wasn't shy of the throttle and was hammering it to get us back before dark. Subconsciously, we all didn't want to be in the forest after the sun went down, that's for sure. As it goes, the sun sets, and we only just started the trek through the forest part. Chris mentioned at once where the path we were on had really overgrown to not slow down. I chuckled and sped up. Just a few moments later, out of nowhere, and I mean nowhere, a massive chunk of oversized mud-built tire had been taken out, almost like a rip. Not a puncture, but a large rip. It was like one moment we were cruising along, and the next we hear and feel this thud that doesn't stop. The path had a very sharp turn coming up, and like I said, this particular part of the forest was easily overgrown, to the point where you were in a tunnel of leaves and branches. I thought to let it roll to a stop, and turned the sharp corner with my two friends still on the back. We turned and saw a man and woman waving us down. They were sitting on the ground. As we got closer, I noticed a kid who looked maybe 10 or so. It was very odd, but we soon realized their mountain bikes and helmets and put two and two together. The man had crashed and had badly sprained his ankle to the point where he couldn't bear any weight on it. Chris immediately went to help, and we followed him. They explained how she wasn't familiar with the tracks and only her husband knew. Chris offered to show her how to get out, and me and Sexton stayed to offer assistance. Being only 13 or 14 at the time, there really wasn't much we could actually do medically. Now, this span of what felt like a whole night of torture happened over 2 or 3 hours, waiting for Chris to get back with the woman and her car. We spoke with the injured man and his young son from the start, but the discomfort he was in made it difficult to actually converse. His son was overly concerned as expected, and stayed by his dad very closely this whole time of waiting. A few moments passed by, and the sound got quiet. My mind started to wander on the tales of the forest. The type of forest you drive past and see pine trees in perfect rows, expecting to see someone standing there. I started to hear distant barking from afar. Living rural, this wasn't unusual, so I genuinely didn't think anything of it. I started to hear talking from deep in the bush. My initial thought was it's people on their property not too far. All seemed fair at this point. I was in small talk with Sexton when all of a sudden I heard the same sound of people, only this time it was quieter yet closer. I turned on the bright LED lights and repositioned the quad to face the direction of the bush I heard the sound from. I saw Sexton, but didn't mention it to the man or the kid for 2 reasons. 1, they had no response to it, nor did it even look like they heard what I heard. 2, me still thinking it's nothing, I didn't want to startle the already discomforted pair. Now Sexton is a wuss. He started shaking the moment we left there. A tree branch breaking would have been enough for him. A few more moments had passed by, and I heard the same thing. This time, one after another, and so on. I turned and said to the man and child, "Did you hear that?" They both looked at me with confusion. I continued to tell the man I heard whispers from them bushes, and all he could say was it was probably a gathering on one of the nearby properties. But I know what I heard, and by the look on Sexton's face, he did too. At this point, I'm on edge, sitting on the seat of this quad trying to distract my mind. Then again, whispers from a group of people, only this time behind me. I immediately turn the quad on, do a 180, and shone the bright lights in that direction. Sexton is trying to persuade me to leave, whilst I persuade him to wait a little longer for Chris to get back. Again, the son and father are completely oblivious to this. This continued on for a bit, me turning the quad around to face whatever direction we kept hearing the whispers from. It then settles completely silent. I faintly eavesdrop on the conversation between the son and father, and I can gather they are in their own worlds. Shocked to this, I finally speak up and tell them. I immediately felt embarrassed, but Sexton's raw look of fear confirmed what I was saying, and the injured man tried to reassure us it was nothing. After 20 minutes of silence, me and Sexton began talking about the possibilities of the whispers, scaring each other endlessly without realizing. After I thought it was over, a still dead feeling surrounded us, and we heard the same whispers, only way louder and way clearer, all around us at the same time. It was coming from up high in the trees and deep in the bushes, everywhere all at once. So loud and clear, but not English or anything I've ever heard. I deemed it speaking in tongues due to later self-research I did as an adult. So clear it was like someone was whispering to me. I looked at Sexton to see his jaw falling to his knees, and his eyes staring at me, wanting to cry but couldn't move. His first words were, "Bro, we gotta get the fuck out of here." My fight or flight was racing, and my initial thought was run until I remembered Chris. I managed to compose myself and calm Sexton down. At this point, the injured man was in a lot of pain, so he wasn't any help, nor his young son. I told Sexton if Chris wasn't here in the next 5 minutes, we are going. I must have told him that every 5 minutes a few times. It worked, though. We saw the car lights appearing, and at this point I didn't care who it was. Luckily, it was Chris and the lady. Chris had this big smile on his face like we just made each other laugh. We didn't have a moment to explain what happened, as the man was everyone's priority, and getting him into the back seat wasn't a good, easy task for us. We got him in, and as Chris was waving them off, me and Sexton were nagging at his arm, telling him to listen. He finally looked at us angrily and confused before I told him we need to go. He looked at Sexton and didn't hesitate twice, charging after the car and asking for a quick lift to the closest road. We got to the road and got reception to phone his older brother. We explained the story, and him and his mates came with a trailer to collect us and the quad as well. Boy, did we feel safe seeing all Chris's brothers and their mates rock up. We loaded up the quad, and me and the boys jumped in the back of the overloading ute as we made our way out of the forest. As we were leaving, I looked into the bushes and saw a tall black figure, shaped like a big man in the shadows, just standing there watching as we drove past. In shock, I didn't move or realize what I'd just seen before looking at Sexton, who was already looking at me with the same look. I simply said, "You see that too," as he nodded slowly with teary eyes. The next day we spoke about it, except for Sexton. He still had that scared look and was in complete disbelief. It's been at least 8.5 years since it happened, and me and Sexton haven't spoken about it since. To this day, it was unexplainable, and I've never been back there. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 409. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you liked the video, please do hit like and subscribe for more. And do support me on my Patreon page, which is linked for you in the description. Even $1 a month helps a great deal. Okay. Let's see, no more business today, so let's move on to Hellfreezer's question of the day, and this one comes from Dust Warden. They left a comment on 407. When you were a child, was there a place you believed was haunted? A local haunted house? A closet you were sure had a monster, etc.? Do you still believe it's haunted? Thank you very much, Dust Warden. Unfortunately, when I was younger, I don't recall any haunted places, although I don't have many clear details from my childhood. But let me know what you think in a comment below. And before we go, let's take a look at the answer of the day from a previous video. And today's answer comes from Paranormal Stories 408. This answer comes from I Am a Uni Wolf. The last horror or scary thing I watched was the news. Well, Certainly, yes, especially with everything that's going on with the wildfires right now. It's absolutely awful. People losing their homes. I did actually see that Denise Crosby, Star Trek actress, granddaughter of Bing Crosby, she's one of the people whose home is in ashes now because of that. See, that's why I prefer the bad things to only happen in movies, because you can turn the movie off when it's done and you know that everyone's okay at the end of it. Anyway, thank you very much for your answer. I am a Unywolf. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves, and give your loved ones a hug.